On this week's video version of our podcast, Trail Cam Radio, we're going back to February when the world was just a little bit more normal, and we sat down with Greg Litzinger. Greg has been a guest of the show in the past, and it's always a pleasure to sit down with him. In this interview, we talk about rubs, taking notes, and hunting the rut. So really good conversation. Always a pleasure to sit down with Greg. He hunts very pressured areas on the East Coast, and we hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you do, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for all the support for John Eberhardt's recent Whitetail Cribs episode. We certainly appreciate it. If you haven't seen it yet, be sure to go check it out on our channel. But for now, let's go ahead and get right into this interview.
Lights, camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, we are live. We are at the top of the show here. We snuck right up. And if we get through this whole podcast without getting kicked off from here or without any crazy interruption, it'll be a miracle. But here we are. Greg, we recorded a podcast about it was really a speed scouting podcast because we were a little limited on time. But I wanted to break down and get a chance to talk a little bit more about rubs. Like I said, we recorded last year, and we just scratched the surface, I feel, on rubs. And you had some interesting perspective. I think rubs are one of the most visual things in the woods, and people get excited. Like when I don't care. Like I understand, like, and we can talk about it later. But when I find a big rub, I don't care if it's a little buck. It still gets me amped up. So we're gonna talk all about rubs, and wherever else the conversation leads us, we appreciate you sitting down. And so yeah, real quick,
appreciate the invite.
This is airing in the fall. We have Cameron on here too. Greg is from New Jersey. You've probably heard him on another podcast. You've kind of done the full tour.
Yeah, I was cool once. You know? Back in my day, kids.
But so yeah, I guess kind of just getting right into things. What are give us top level of rubs in your book? What do they mean to you, and where do they rank in the terms of deer sign for you?
For me, like I said, it's very visual. It's a very, very visual cue. They're easy to see from far, and usually they're kind of consistent. And you find one big rub year after year, there's a reason, you know. But big, tall rubs, bushes. I love finding bushes, you know, thumb-sized bushes that are just shredded. You know, that is the cream of the crop for me. When I see something that can snap, you know, just destroy a bush, you know it's a big deer, you know. And height, you know, big, tall rubs. And like you said, even if you see a tree that's this big, it's just rubbed, you don't really that much, it's still exciting to see because you're just like, oh, that's a big tree. And he's angry, you know. It's probably a little bully buck or whatever, but still it's exciting to find that sign. You know, it's probably the sign that most people can relate to when they find it. Mm-hmm. Trying to interpret it, that's the how, why, that's the big key.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The rubs are the most visual thing in the woods, but I would say they're also probably some of the most misunderstood things in the woods because of how readily available they are everywhere. Like, there's just a big misconception on, like, you see a giant rub, it's a giant deer.
Yes.
Or the opposite. If you see a small rub, you're like, oh, it's just a little buck.
I ran cameras, you know, back in the day with flash cameras on rubs, and I was surprised at how many little deer will hit a big rub. And one big deer will walk by and smell it. He won't even hit it. Like, it's almost like you don't need to hit it. He's just checking who's there. And the activity level of each area is different. Like some areas in the salt marsh, beginning of October, rubs are destroyed. And then nothing until middle of October, it becomes like a doe travel corridor. And bucks will come by, throw it, and they'll smell it. You know, they'll just rub their head on it real fast and move on. And I've had other ones where, you know, you just look at this bush, just get just demolished. And it's a one and done. You know, usually in a bush you find he's just angry, he's frustrated. You know, he might have got beat up 5 minutes ago, or he's just lonely and it's like, I'm going to destroy this bush and never be seen again. So trying to decipher, you know, especially in-season scouting is a lot different than postseason. Because postseason, you kind of set you set your schedule. I'm like, all right, I got to rub here. But if they're kind of like scattered, or it could be a staging area, you know, it might be a bed nearby. But I like to find, lines where you get a consistent pattern movement. The old perennial signpost rubs.
Yep. That's
kind of what I gravitate towards now when I'm looking for rubs. Years ago, it was fresh, big, random rub out in the middle of the woods. I'd hunt over that thing and try and decipher it. It's just you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Those rub lines and those signpost rubs where like the tree's like almost dead. It's rubbed all the way around. It's like hourglass shape. Like that's what I gravitate towards now.
Let's break that down a little bit. Like when you're saying you're finding a rub line.
Yeah.
Like what is that exactly? Like why?
Just a travel corridor from either in between doe bedding areas, usually doe bedding areas, or like a rut cruising lane, or even like a escape hatch. I find that in the mountain a lot of times. They'll come down off of a hill, and usually it's real thick cover, and there'll be a rub line, perennial. It might not be the same as that tree, but you can see where it's going. And I think it's from the gun pressure, where that's real thick and nasty. They can kind of travel coming up and out, because if a deer don't need to travel and cover, from what my understanding is, they won't travel in thick stuff unless they're forced to. If you find rubs in real thick stuff, usually it's high pressure area or an older deer, and then there's like security cover, and you might have a chance at, if you find out the how and why, getting a shot at a deer. But like open timber, yeah, move on.
For the person that this might be the first time they've ever really dove into rubs, can you explain what a perennial rub is too?
They're just yearly rubs, they're hit every year for a decade. I got some spots I've been hunting for 12 years. The same tree's been hit every year, same time, and I put cameras on it, and a lot of it's nighttime activity, but it's just a single big rub. It's just a big, island in the marsh where just a lot of deer activity. So it's 20, 30 different deer. Does will rub their little heads on it or smell it. It's just a big communication standpoint. And I think it's almost like a scrape, like a community scrape. You get those. I won't call it a community rub, but it's a rub where deer, they know who's coming and going.
Signpost rub.
Yep. And I have so many does will just smell the rub. And almost every doe that walks by one of those perennial rubs will smell it. Which is weird. It's like, that's strange, but she wants to know.
That's
like,
interesting.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts if deer are smelling it? Are you the guy that's putting your hand on the rub to take a picture?
No.
Or hanging your hat on the tree?
No,
or
that's all.
Bow on the tree?
Yeah, no.
Thigh up against the tree?
Yeah, when I first find them, I might do that, because usually I find the rubs. It's, if I'm hunting a new area like late November, I'm like, we go here, and if it's a perennial rub, I'm like, that's the first time I ever found it. I'll usually, like now cell phones are great. You take a picture.
Yeah. Drop a pin.
Yep. And I used to keep my postseason scouting, keep a log, pictures, old flash, photography, and take a picture and put it in a journal. Height, I'd measure height, distance, because you can tell, if a deer's got something on its bases, or tine. You see a little tine mark over here, or you got a big, massive center section destroyed, and there's tine marks up here. If you find 3 or 4 more of them in a general area, odds are
it's probably the same deer.
Yeah, there's characteristics that it takes a while to decipher, and usually you're wrong, but sometimes you're right as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember when you mentioned that last year on the podcast, and you're the first person I've ever come across that measured, documented the rubs and tried to put those tine marks in correlation.
Yeah, and now you can stand next to it. I got some in the salt marsh like that, where I seen that big 160 this year. I mean, I know it's him because he's just super wide and really long tines, but I mean, there's tine marks up near my armpit, and it's like, it's got to be him, because he had tines this long, and you look at a deer, you're like, all right, well, he's kind of standing here, and you kind of correlate, like, all right, there's 12-inch, 14-inch tines, or who's making that? Because they're not going to jump up and make things, know.
Right.
So, or you get the trees where the tine marks are behind, like, all right, cluster trees, you got tine marks on trees that are 12 inches behind it. He's a long tined or a long main beam deer.
Mm-hmm. So when you see a rub for the first time, you take into consideration height over diameter.
Yes. Height and tine marks, because deer could be just we've killed all short. I've killed a couple mature bucks that got short stubby legs. I've killed some with really long legs. So you look at the base and then what's above the main where they're rubbing with their brow tines. And you can see up high and down low, and it's, you you might get right, 50% of the time. But now with cameras, it's a lot easier to know what's hitting it. And I want to get back into that this fall. I found some really good rubs and an idea where that big 5-pointer was. I got an idea where he might be coming from, so I want to put a camera out there. I got to figure out a way to put it in the salt marsh and not have the tide take it away or someone steal it. So I got to talk with some trappers, and see what they do with their traps, how to keep a fox or coyote from taking it out, I guess. I don't know.
That sounds like an interesting project. Yeah. Let me ask you this. So this is obviously airing probably in October. If you're coming across a rub for the first time in October, what are some things that you're considering? I know you talked about whether it's perennial or where's it at and how many are there, but
food. If you look at you come across Oak Flat and there's rubs, it's probably because there's food there. Mm-hmm. Especially if it's not all the time, he's either cruising looking for food, beginning of October, or he's cruising, from food to bedding. Mm-hmm. As the month rolls on, I think deer like every 2 weeks are constantly changing. The food changes, pressure changes, their testosterone level changes, daylight level changes, the does patterns change. So if after a few years hunting a spot, you can kind of break it down into what it might be, estimate a guess. It's a guess at best. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not a scientist or radio tracking deer, but I've hunted some non-pressured areas, and they behave differently than some of the areas that I hunt, which is, very, understandable.
Yeah.
If you hunt pressured areas, and deer are going to be hold tight to cover. Rubs are usually in thick, nasty stuff. And if you do find one out in the open, it's, nighttime, field edge, garbage stuff.
So let me paint you this scenario. You're on Oak Flat, you see rubs. How are you going to set up on that deer, or are you? What other pieces are you looking for to see if you need to set up on it?
If it's near bedding, I'd give it a shot. But if it's just in the middle, say, no possible bedding calls in October, I won't hunt it. I'll hunt them, if it's near bedding area going to and from. Or food, I'm not a big fan of hunting food personally. Mm-hmm. I've never had much luck. A lot of people do. I just don't. So if I get rubs near bedding, that gets me excited.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like scrapes
relating
in the same sense. Like if the sign that you're finding correlated to bedding, if it's close to bedding, it's probably a good sign to hunt.
As some of the people know, I'm a big bed hunter. Pushing damn near 30 years. Old Roger Ragland stuff.
Do you think you're not finding much luck on food because of how pressured it is?
Yeah, they're coming in, or they're coming in. And being a self-filmer, that's the worst. Because I've passed numerous deer because I couldn't get them film, and I stopped filming this year because I wanted to kill something. Because of I'm not getting paid that. I just want to kill something big. But food is it's can play off in November, but for the most part he's in there looking for ladies, not for the food.
Right.
And I find most daylight activity near beds, within 100 yards of a bed, and some deer don't even rub at all near their bed because I think it draws attention. Like rubs, like you said, it's like a magnet. People go, oh,
the
rub,
neon
and they go right to it, and then they stink it up, and the deer's like, wait a minute, if I rub here, he might be getting close to me. So I've had some bucks that come out of bed, you see him come out of bed, there's no rubs to be found. Like, he doesn't rub, because rubs can equal danger. Scrapes equal danger, and some deer are just wired differently. And some deer don't care, and other deer are so secretive and so, they don't be bothered at all. They're just like, I ain't doing shit here. I'll rub like 500 yards away.
That's interesting. Chad and I always talk about that. Like when we're scouting beds and we're trying to find beds, we never find rubs in their beds. And then the ones that we do, we always correlate to those being like rut beds.
Yeah. And some deer are just more rub friendly. Like I said, just years of doing it, I've only seen maybe a dozen deer actually rub trees, outside of November. Like October, like I think a lot of them are just, morning, like early, that gray light where you're just kind of missing it. And, it's not exact science, I don't think. And I don't think there's any like right or wrong answer to why deer do what they do. They're just fucking deer,
One really interesting, I guess my only piece of data, my only data point, I had a camera over in a ditch in Illinois, and I had it up in a tree. Like really big 8-pointer came in and marked up a tree, MIA for the remainder of the year, and then almost to the date, plus or minus a day, he came in and worked the same exact tree, and that was it, and he was gone.
Yep, and I had that spot in the salt marsh, this rub line. I'm like, this is it, and I hunted it for 3 years, and I refused to put a camera on it because I'm like, I'm beating this deer, and nothing. So I hung a camera, and it was this bully buck, nice big body, just this weird looking thing because it was all shredded and gnarled. I'm like, this thing's a monster, but he literally just rubbed all the way, as far as he could, and all the way down, so it looked like a big buck, but it really wasn't. And he hit it the first week in November. Never seen him again, ever. And it's like why? Like I put the camera in September, and I pulled it in January, and he literally, like, I checked it a few times, changed the batteries, but the first week in November, first week of October, like that was like a 3-day span, and he did that, like you said, like 2 years in a row, and never seen, probably got killed or died of old age or who knows. Yeah. But it was just so weird. And every big buck that came by in November would smell it, brush up against it and kind of move on, wouldn't hit it. But I don't even know why. It's just
well, the only thing I could think with this is that ditch held a doe family year round, and it was not on it was on like the cow path going through it, like all the does use it, and I think that was the only thing I could think of. But
and there's certain like triggers and time of year, like in the mountains. I ran cameras the last 3 years, and I found like down where I hunt salt marsh, like scrapes after like the 31st, 2nd, you don't get a lot of activity. In the mountains, the first 6 days of November was insane. So many day walkers of monsters. I mean, like monsters. You're like completely what you would not think that would happen. But you're like, but down south where where I live, it's like the complete polar opposite. Like the first, second, it kind of tapers off to nothing. But in the mountains, completely different. And same with rubs. Up there, the mountains, they hit them at a different time than down here, and it's different areas, different deer. Food, who knows what, I don't know.
Do you think the volume of rubs or like rubs on the brushes, like bushes and stuff that you were mentioning, what does that mean to you? Does it mean there's a higher buck density, more aggression between two bucks in the area? And the only reason I asked that is like a CRP field, there was a whole bunch of young sapling trees, and I walked through there, and everything was thrash. Yeah. And on the camera, there was 3 or 4 mature bucks. Now, obviously, it was in New Jersey, but I guess what's your thoughts on that?
I think it has to do with like the age structure and the amount of deer. Like some of the spots I hunt, the age structure is garbage because you can literally, like gun season, it's damn near 30 days of gun hunting, and they will literally massacre anything that moves. Nobody really practices quality deer management in some of the spots I hunt. So a lot of 1.5-year-olds just get murdered, and then 2-year-olds just get massacred. So them 3-year-old deer, they get a little, if you got a bunch of 3-year-old deer, I think you probably get some more rubs because it's this is my area now. I'm fighting it, and they're leaving their scent, trying to, gain control. I've actually seen recently a lot more grunting, a lot more aggression towards my grunt calls, which is strange because I never had that before, So I don't know if the age structure is getting, different. But I do believe it has to do with how many bucks, because if there's one buck, is he really going to rub a million times? Probably doesn't need to,
right?
But that's just my take on it. I don't know if there's any science behind that. But if you got a bunch of bucks, they're going to be like battling out. Like, this is my area. This is my area. Like, I seen a fight this year. I mean, like a full-fledged Texas fight in 9 o'clock in the morning, right next to a road, like a big heavy 7, and this little buck was not backing down from the 7, and it's second week of October. I mean, they were like going at it. Dust is flying, and I'm like 3 yards away, like trying to look with my binoculars. I'm like, I just see dust. I'm like, what's going on? And they were, like going at it, and I'm like, and there was like 2 does out in the field, and I'm like, oh shit, like they were legit fighting,
getting after it.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, all right, well, I'll take that,
So let's backpedal quite a bit. So say I'm walking into a new piece of property. I have this property I hunt in Pennsylvania that I've been trying to figure out forever. Tons of rubs. Like everywhere you look, it's like, oh, there's a rub, there's a rub, there's a rub. Where I hunt in Ohio, not like that at all. But so I'm walking into this piece of property. I'm trying to correlate, like, okay, there's rubs here, there's rubs here, there's rubs here, there's rubs here. When a buck is rubbing a tree, what is he saying? Like, what is?
He's just leaving a scent. For me, it's like a scent signpost thing, or he's just like super aggressive. It could be a young deer, it's a testosterone's pumping, or it's some deer like rub friendly. Like they're just letting everybody know this is my spot. Like,
so it's territorial.
Yeah, it's definitely food related, bedding related, or like a sexually related. I don't think they're going to rub like, oh, I'm just going to rub something for no reason. Deer are pretty, they don't do things just to do things. Usually there's a reason why they're doing it. But I've had, like I said, with the CRP fields and random fields, just everything's thrashed. And I do believe it's just more bucks in there.
That makes a lot of sense.
Or guys like, this is my spot. There's 3 bucks, but just back up. This is my home. Get off my couch.
Yeah, in those CRP fields too, those bushes or young trees, they're way more visual too. I'm sure the deer. And it's not like the hardwood. And which tree do I rub? Like that's the only thing, and they go and beat the heck out of it.
Yeah, and if you have that, is like I look at direction, travel, wind. You put different. You start looking at things like with perennial rubs. You see they're pointing one direction. Usually, like the big signpost rubs, I find they're heading one direction. They're not. Very rarely do I find one that's like a 2-way rub line. It's usually just going from point A to point B. Where it's going is another story. But like them areas that are just totally thrashed, might be a buck that, he's guarding it. I'm trying to go, this is my turf, or it could be a buck that's new to there and he's like, oh, all right, I'll take this. He smells the doe and he's like, all right, and he's letting other deer know that there's other deer here.
Right. When you find those perennial lines, are you finding anywhere where there's like, so you have a line going this way? Is there anywhere like that circles back around and you have a line going back?
Some you might get like, for me, usually they follow like a path, either food or cover or ditch or something. In the big woods, it's just kind of flat rolling. Some of the spots on it, they just go straight until they just peter out for no reason. So they're coming up somewhere, and usually it's probably like food or where a bunch of doe trails might be. And an older deer, they're very They conserve their energy. Them younger deer run around, but like some of them older deer, they're like, all right, for me to get here to here, conserve the most energy possible, I need to go here. I'm not going to do all this, back and forth. I'm going to just make one clear run. And I think that has a lot to do with just, it's the shortest distance, safest distance.
That makes sense.
One question I wanted to, I guess, not really a question, just a statement and get your thoughts, but I'm sure even in different pieces of public in New Jersey, rubs probably mean different things based on the pressure there. What's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. Like we were talking earlier, like some areas are so pressured that deer they don't want to leave sign, and that's with rubs, you can have, they might get hit once and they look like they're fresh, like cedar trees and pine trees, like they'll look good for a while, especially like cedar trees. You're like, man, that's just fresh.
Yeah.
I run cameras, it's like you find like 3 weeks later, it still looks good. So, but rubs and big tracks usually equal big deer. So if you got a lot of big rubs, or even like small rubs, but you're getting, 4-finger tracks and big tracks, and there are tracks all over different directions, or consistent pattern, then it's probably a good spot to hunt.
When you say a 4-finger track, you don't mean that, like you put your hand out, put it on the track, and it's 4 fingers wide.
No, like you just put up, I go like this, if the track's like this, you just kind of just. Is probably the best way to do it,
Right.
Because if you, like, I actually had a post on my Instagram where I was, where Johnny killed his buck and we killed those 3 bucks. His deer and my deer side by side, the hoof prints. I mean, it's like night and day. Like my buck was here, like this, and then his buck was like this was the track.
Oh.
And then you're like, oh,
there's a really big difference.
Yeah. I mean, noticeable difference. And his deer, a guy had pictures of it for 2 or 3 years prior. So that deer was 5, maybe 6 years old. Mine was a year and a half, maybe 2.
Mm-hmm.
And you can it's like, wow, that's depressing.
Yeah.
It's like, And then you put them like side by side, you're like, oh, it's even more depressing because the body was just so massive. 140-inch 8-pointer probably wouldn't get much bigger.
Yeah.
Just a big mountain deer. The genetics aren't going to be, 180-inch deer. He's just a big, mature mountain buck.
Yeah.
But it's a night and day difference. Body composure, just the way the muscles felt. I mean, just everything. You're like, wow, this really was depressing. Hanging them side by side, I was like, can we just take mine, like, just get rid of that thing, please?
When you're talking about the freshness of the rubs, what is one way that you can tell, like, shavings on the ground?
Yeah, I look for shavings because, after a couple days, the wind blows and leaves and whatever and kind of blows over. And if you got, like, a fresh, after, a big heavy windstorm, it's dormant, no wind, and you get a bunch of shavings, like that's fresh because, nothing's really been blowing around. And I hunt some of the swamps, and it's kind of hard, like, and the marsh or swamps because the tide comes in and out. All that stuff gets taken away, and then you're like, that looks fresh, but is it really? Because it's always wet in the swamp, you know. Then you're like, I don't know. And some deer prefer, the rub hardwoods. Some deer prefer to rub, the soft, cedars, pines. And I think every deer is different. I mean, that one buck I killed in the big woods, he rubbed the same tree. His, messed up little brow tine, and I tracked him because of that. And that's pretty much led me to where he was bedding because everything was heading this one direction, and it's the same rubs because, the right side was all jacked up, and you're like, all right, you find the bed, rubs, and kind of pointing at him. It's like, all right, that's got to be him, and sure enough, it was him.
One for everyone here. Think of all the bucks you've shot. Have all of them had tree shavings on their brow tines? Because during this conversation, I'm thinking almost every deer or every buck I've killed has had some.
And I'm an October guy. 99% of my kills come from 6 to the 26. Everyone but one had shavings, like fresh shavings.
Yeah.
So I think deer do rub. Even might just be a little nudge, whatever, because they just leave their scent. Like I don't know if they're trying to actually leave a big scent. They might just want to just or have a scratch on their head or just leave a little bit of sign. I don't know.
Get some testosterone out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then because that pad too, you notice as the season changes, like that pad changes color and density. It gets puffier and all the oils are
red and dark and yep. I love it.
Yeah,
fired up.
We're sitting here in February talking about stuff going on.
This is horrible.
I live in November year round. Let's be real, October, November. But okay. Do you have anything to add, Cameron? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess that kind of leads us into a good segue into the postseason rubs. You're finding rubs in the postseason. What are you looking for at that point when you can't hunt them? It doesn't mean much to you now. When you find rubs in the postseason, what are you doing with them?
Trying to find a direction, a general direction, because meander and if I can find 3 or 4 in a row or a cluster, I really will, take a good look at a map, and like I said, Google Earth plus Onyx plus whatever other map I have on my phone, and really figure out why they're here. That's a lot of the why with anything.
Yep.
Why is that here? And you're going to need to take a step back. You can drop a pin, and if you kind of move on, but deer, they leave all the sign we need to figure them out. It's like a puzzle piece. You just got to keep putting it together. If you have an area where it's just big rubs, big tracks, you got to figure out why it's all here. Was it food? And you look around. All right, no oaks, probably not food. Is there any type of browse? And that's where Google Earth comes in. You can kind of see why is it here. All right, maybe those have browse. And you can almost decipher what time of year that rub could possibly be.
That's super important.
And a lot of people just walk by rubs, and they're so quick to bed hunting, go into beds.
Yeah.
Well, that's
still a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, the rubs are very important, especially at a certain time of year. Is it a rut cruising rub line? If it's going for a couple hundred yards, and that's what's good about Onyx maps. You can actually sit there and then zoom out and be like, oh, it's following this. It's following this little squiggle line. You might not necessarily see it. If you look at the woods, you're like, but it could be just a little curve, or it could be vegetation. If you go to Google Earth, you look at it, you're like, okay, so there's some cover here, some shade here.
I think that's really cool information. I was telling you when we took a break that being a new hunter, there's this big misconception with rubs, and I've always walked around looking at rubs they don't mean anything to me, because there's this big movement towards rubs are made at night, scrapes are made at night, don't worry about hunting that, and it's find their beds, hunt the food, but those rubs can tell you what route they're taking from their bed to the food. Yeah, because something had to come through there. And you see the single-use rubs. A lot of people misinterpret a rub it's a one-time use. The deer's just wandering, looking for does, or it's all right. But if you find those clusters, those lines, or traditional rubbing areas, in a thick hollow or along a ditch or crossing, they're there for a reason. Right. It's not a random rub. And that's why I like the annual perennial rubs. The signpost rubs. Those things are there for a reason. Why? And I love finding them now because I will literally rack my brain for hours. All right, I got one here, and across this dirt road there's another one. All right, there's line. Where's he going? And it's a big
all right, you almost like Tetris. You're trying to like fit this in here and like trying to figure out where he might be going, and it's and a lot of times those signpost rubs are nighttime rubs, but it gives you an indication of what's there, of why he's coming through there. Usually, they're rut based, doe based. I don't think I've ever found one that's food based. Because food's constantly changing, unless I don't really hunt cropland necessarily. So, but maybe in Midwest,
what I've seen
different.
is some field edge rubs, but they're never like the ones that get you real excited.
Yeah.
They're probably young bucks.
Yeah.
A lot of times they're along the way, but that's a good point.
And like I said, deer, they just don't do things really, on average, just to do things. They're scraping at a certain spot, annual scrape areas, for a reason. Cover, food, the does. Same with those annual rubs. They're there for a specific reason. You need to figure out why, and that's the hard part because people don't want to take time. This day and age, we're like, we need it now. We
instant gratification.
Yeah. Well, some spots might take 3 or 4 years.
Easy button.
Yeah. They staples.
Yep.
But it might take 3 or 4 years to figure out the why, and usually it's year in, year out. And once you figure out that spot, like that spot I got in the mountains, like that scrape, that's probably like that every year.
Yeah.
And so weird and random to have that, but I can't figure out for the life of me why they do it. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's close to a hiking trail. It's real open. There's a little bit of like laurel, but it's like, well, you guys are doing it. And I'm like, I'm going to capitalize on it.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you get lucky sometimes. And other times you hunt. Single rubs are pointless. Rubs near bedding for me. That's kind of, the key, because you can have a giant, massive amount of rubs. If the buck's not bedding within 100 yards, 150 yards, like some of the spots I hunt, what's the point?
Especially at the time of year that you're killing your deer. If you're killing your time is October 6th to October 26th. That's the October lull.
Yeah.
That's when, that's when you can't.
Yeah.
You can't kill a big deer then.
They're predictable because it's bedding the feeding. That is predictable. The rut, once that first doe comes in heat and they're like, that's not. You can't predict this movement. It's like a earthquake.
And where you're at, the pressure.
It
pressure
ramps up.
Yep.
Once Halloween starts, it's like,
Yep.
First week of November ain't too bad. Actually, it's really bad. Horrible. Yeah, but like the typical middle of November, because a lot of bait hunters, they just pile on and they just sit there because you find the does. Yep. You find the does, you find the bucks come middle of November.
Yeah. We're going a little bit backwards, but one thing that I've experienced with the rubs too, after exploring, like let's say it's the 3rd week in November and I'm walking through a spot I haven't yet this year, and then you just see it tore up.
Yeah.
There's a sense of regret, like shit. Yeah. I should have been here.
That's
have you had that happen, and what mental notes do you make to where it doesn't happen again?
One of the biggest rubs I found recently is in the salt marsh, and I never walked it because it's like I'm not walking over there, but there's this one tree. You can't really see it because it's rubbed on the one side, but it's just massacred. And you're like, I've walked by it for years, and it's like, And then one day I kind of just went this way, and it's like, this whole time it's been here, and it's like, all right. And then you look at the direction, and you're like, and you kind of break it down. You kind of see this little faint trail in the cattails, and you're like, it's coming up from behind that old abandoned house, and you're like, this whole time, he's bedding up near an old foundation, and it's nasty, it's thick. I'm like, duh, like 10 years, decade wasted, but that's what they do. The rub's far enough away from bed so it's not a danger to him, but it's like, wow, it's there the whole time, and they're a word, I wouldn't say a regret, but it's like, I'm dumb. I'm an idiot, Like
it's all learning process.
Yeah.
You hopefully only get smarter and humbled more.
Yeah, but even like the scrapes, like this year, one spot I hunted, and usually it's every year there's like a 3-day window. I hunted nothing, so I was like, I'm gonna go back. I'm like, there's nothing there, and then I came back like 2 days later, and it was like just tore up, and it's like, because that time of year, at the end of October, odds are there's one buck coming in daylight activity making those things, and you're like, I'm an idiot.
When you're looking at running your cameras, are rubs something that you're placing a lot of cameras on?
I used to, and then I had some cameras stolen. So if I do put them over a rub, usually they're in some thick, nasty, because with rubs, it draws human attention.
Oh, yeah.
And, like I said, last year I had 3 cameras stolen. And they literally cut down a tree with a handsaw like that big to steal my camera. I had cable lock and everything. And it's like, and I put them like 8-9 feet up in the air, and it's like, so if I do put them on, like I got a few spots now this year. I found some rubs. I'm going to put them up, probably beginning of October and just let them soak. I probably won't even, I just want to know what's there. I have an idea what's there, but, without actually, a picture's worth 1,000 words,
And outside of, like, the strategy behind putting a camera on a rub, like, not a lot of people get to see deer rub trees.
No, and that's cool. What's great with video. Like, back in the day I did it, it was just the white flash,
Yep.
But now videos, it's like even just a throwaway camera, basically, the video, because sometimes you think, oh, they're coming in this way, and that buck will come in and do something totally different. You're like, and they'll actually come in and posture on a rub or a scrape in the complete opposite direction where you think they're coming. And you're like, I never would have thought that. Because I would have hunted here, and he's coming in from this way. You would get busted every time. And you're like, oh, all right,
One of my favorite sequence of videos was from a customer out east, and I had a buck and a cluster of trees rubbing, and he got his head stuck on the actual on the video, and then you can see, like, he sent multiple. It was like it was like a 5-minute sequence, and the deer relaxed and then got unstuck. But it was like,
wow,
that's
pretty
great.
amazing. Like, and he would never, you would never guess. Like, sometimes you find the dead deer, like you see the pictures online that go viral, but like that deer was about to be a case.
Dang.
But
it's neat. Technology, it's can help you, but also it can be a crutch because you rely so much on that. And that's another thing with been leery about the trail cameras because you rely too much on that and you lose your gut instinct. You're not sharpening your saw, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've been all my deer I've killed have no cameras. It's just been that gut feeling and the hard work and the homework. You're like, all right, this is what he's going to do, and I'm still not 100% on the cameras because you just use that. It's like a Band-Aid or a crutch.
Right.
It's like
crutches, exactly.
You could easily rely too heavily on them. You just have to find that sweet spot where you can
use them as data points.
And that's for me. Like I set them out, and they usually sit, all a month.
To do it.
And I got some in the mountains. I set them in October. I'll pull them in March when I go up there scouting, or February overnight. And there's 4 cameras up there right now where I have an idea what's on there because I've been running them for like 3 years, but I don't really hunt that spot if I set the camera there because I think it's kind of cheating sometimes. But it's like
what podcast you're on, right, Greg? I'm just giving you a hard time. But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's the flip side of it, absolutely.
And with it, and a lot of my cameras too, like they're so far back, I don't want to check them because it's like, man, it's like fucking work.
Oh,
and it's like I don't want to like the wind or rain. I'm like, I'd rather be hunting than checking cameras. Like you can scout your way in, and usually I set cameras and scout them when I'll pull them sometimes because like once November hits, the bucks are off the islands and there's no sense of running the camera there to get stolen because I've never seen them come off that island, once November hits because they're in the mainland chasing the does. So usually you hunt it and pull the camera. But even that, I feel kind of I feel like I'm going to make noise. Sometimes I'm so close. The cameras I run like as close as possible to their beds as I can. Well, because you're sitting there in a tree next to where the camera's sitting, you're like, I should just check that. And then you're like, if I make a noise, and then he's like debating, should I do it? And like I've tried pulling the card out, and you drop things, make noise, and it's like, Or you sit there and you're like, man, I have plenty of time. And then I get down and check it, and it's like dead. You're like, waste my time,
You got to get you some cell cams.
Do you have signal out that way?
Most part, yeah.
Yeah.
It's if someone sold a cell cam, I'd probably, I don't know what I'd do.
Oh my God, yeah. That's a big investment.
Whole other level. It's different when it's a $25 Tasco.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, those cell cameras would be nice. But there again with that, relying on that, that information, and people are like, look at my, especially in Jersey, like everybody's got their bait piles, and you always see a picture on Instagram, like there's a pile of bait and the cell cam, and the dude's just time stamping deer. And I'm like, how's that entertaining, man? Like to me, that's not entertaining at all.
And like the crutch thing you talked about, Chad and I hunted a big deer down in southern Ohio that the day that we saw him, he wouldn't have been on camera. And he was 17 yards away from the tree that we were hunting. We hunted the tree that the camera is in. So that deer could walk past that tree at 17 yards away every single day and not be on that camera. Agreed. And we would be like, oh, well, he's not on camera, we don't hunt him.
Yep, and that's where, like Johnny, where we're in PA, he will set up cameras, like 2 cameras in one area, so we catch a big, wide berth. Because, like, dude, your trigger only this big and 20 feet sometimes. And sometimes the buck's moving fast, like it's long gone. So I'm like, oh, that makes sense. So I actually got some on some buck beds this year. After I had that, because I know out in the marsh, I blew a deer going out on there, but I actually put 2 cameras in there to see like how he's coming in there, like because you said you put it on a trail. Well, he might be coming this way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it don't trigger, this camera sucks. But he's there like every day. You don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're closing in. We either need to take another break or wrap it up.
I think it's good to wrap up. Conclusion on the rubs. Correlate it to sign. Height over diameter.
Yes.
And look at the physical track being left near the rub.
And you can find, you can find the rubs, the characteristic of a rub and a track. Sometimes, you can say like, all right, this rub here has got this time marks, and this track is this big. So if you take a good, like, all right, the track's this big, you go somewhere else, 800 yards away, you're like, there's a big track, put your hand next to it. It's
find that same
identical.
track.
I'm like, that's probably him.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not in the Midwest because there's big deer everywhere. But us East Coasters,
I was thinking of coming to New Jersey this year, actually. But Chuck,
got some waiters.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Greg. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you sometime before next year at Harrisburg. But
yes.
But where can they track you down if they haven't found you yet?
Instagram, YouTube, Bowhunting Fiend.
It's pretty. Mm-hmm. Yep, and chase moments over, not inches.
Exactly.
So, all right. Well, thanks, Greg. We appreciate it.
Yeah, man.